Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And since I horned in on this event originally years ago, Mike gets to pick what we talk about. And he picked an anthology, a collection volume this time around from the late 1980s. This thing, the greatest Batman stories ever told. Turns out this is volume 1. There's a second volume to this as well. But this one came out originally in like 88 or 89. It came out right before the completely disastrous Batman movie that not only made a mockery of the whole concept of Batman by casting a stand-up comedian, miscasting a stand-up comedian, stunt casting a stand-up comedian as Batman, but also set the mold for the modern summer blockbuster and also the modern superhero blockbuster. There's nothing good about that movie. I know that I am preaching alone in a field. The Dude Bros have completely won that argument. There's nothing good about that movie. Batman is entirely out of character. All of the other people in the movie are not just silly, but ridiculous. Including, most fatally of all, Jack Nicholson as the Joker. The Joker in the Michael Keaton Batman movie is a fat, cuddly buffoon who dies at the end of the movie. He doesn't disappear in an explosion or, underneath some toxic sludge. He dies. He falls to his death from hundreds of feet in the air and hits the concrete so hard that he embeds in it to 2 or 3 inches. No one bothered to tell the director that that's not what happens to bodies that hit concrete. It doesn't matter. So I got to watch a Batman movie in which Batman is a gibbering buffoon, the Joker is a gibbering buffoon, and the Joker, a character who's 60 years old, a creation that's 60 years old, dies. So we're living in a Batman universe without the Joker because the Joker is dead. And you have to reboot. You just have to reboot that whole thing. You can't do anything with it after that. A classic example of a director just thinking that the material is his to do with what he wants. This took place, I think this anthology came out before that disastrous movie. Don't get me started on big screen Batman movies. Just don't get me started. And there's a problem with this book right away. This is a typical Batman anthology. My favorite one for years and years and years, the only one for years and years and years, was a hardcover volume called Batman from the 30s to the 70s. And it has the same problem. This at least puts the title, the description there in the title, greatest. But the problem with calling an anthology the greatest comic book stories of any character is, and you guessed it right, the Stan Lee virus. Stan Lee reinvented the idea of comic books when he reinvented the Marvel Comics line in the 1960s. And suddenly, you had narrative arcs and relatability and continuity, all kinds of things that weren't present in comic books before Stan Lee did that. And like any virus, it jumped from host to host. It didn't stay with Marvel Comics. My contention is that before the Stan Lee virus, it would have been a little silly to say that any one comic book story was better or worse than any other. Certainly greatest. Maybe here and there a moment or an issue, but not a whole anthology worth. That was totally beside the point of a comic book character at all, of reading a comic book month by month. It was beside the point that to ask whether or not it would be good or great or the greatest. It's only after that virus that I think that becomes an acceptable concept, and also that becomes a concept that writers are writing towards. If it wasn't on their mind before, then they wouldn't be writing towards it. Once it is on their mind, they will sometimes be writing towards it. It will at least be in the back of their mind. Am I doing a good Batman story or am I doing a bad Batman story? And this anthology is split right down the middle. Half the stories in here take place before the Stan Lee virus entered comic books. So are they the greatest Batman stories? No. No, not at all. They are completely interchangeable with any other kind of Batman story that you could tell. One of the editors, or the overseers of this volume, actually says it in his introduction to this volume, that no, that for a lot of these early Batman stories, what we'll be including will be the first appearance of Bat Dog, or Batmite, or Catwoman, or the Joker, or the Penguin, or Two-Face. We'll want to include their first appearance. We'll want to include a very early version of Batman, the original version of Batman, who was a stilted, quasi-supernatural creature. He wasn't supernatural himself, but he often fought supernatural villains and had no qualms about killing. A weird, stiff figure. You look at those earliest, that first year of Batman, and you will be stumped why this character became one of the most popular comic book characters of them all. You'll be just stumped. And I maintain that this character's popularity does not derive from that first year. I think this character was saved, was rescued into popularity, not created that way. Unlike, for instance, Superman, one of the other most famous comic book characters, well, who was massively popular from the beginning. Batman had to be changed. He had to be just ever so slightly reinvented. And that has just kept on going. You see that in this book. This character is reinvented many, many times. And you get some early stories like that in this anthology. Some of them are... some of them are sillier than others. Definitely, this is what I mean by the early Batman there, and that right there, you're going to have to Google that, you young people. But this is something that used to be called a telephone pole. It was made of wood. It occurred every 20 feet on every street in every burg in every city in the country, and it had a cross tree up at top with wires that connected it to the next pole, and then the next pole, and the next pole. That was how you made a telephone call. Never mind. But you get this early creepy Batman, and that moves on as the book goes on here. I swear, much as I love the Chunky app for reading digital comics, I have to say, Read Era, Readera, is even better because it scrolls much easier, and it's also a lot smoother as an upload process. I didn't even know at first. I didn't even know that it was such a thing. I didn't know that it would read comic book files. This thing has newspaper cartoons as well, but it also has main issues. We get, for instance, Batman's origin story, where he says, criminals are a cowardly, superstitious lot. I shall become a bat. We get the standard origin story of Batman, where he is a little boy, eyewitness to the murder of his parents, and decides to devote himself to a one-man war against crime. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm not the first person to comment on the fact that that makes Batman a far greater psycho than the Joker. The Joker at least has a chemical contaminant to explain himself. Batman is literally a psychotic. We're not supposed to think that way, so we'll just leave it be. There are stories here. Like I said, the first half of this volume has to be representative. As much as anything, it has to be representative. It can't go for quality because no one writing these things back then was going for quality. That was beside the point. That is a very, very dubious byproduct of the Stan Lee virus. It wasn't part of comics originally. It was, here's a story. I'm going to come up with a wacky idea. Almost always, it will be generated from the cover. And I'm going to retrofit the cover to a wacky idea. I'm going to throw in a few Snickers bars ads. Maybe I'll come up with a backup story. And then we'll move on to the next one. You're not going to keep this. You 8-year-olds out there that we're writing these things for, you're not going to keep it. You're never going to reread it. So what difference does it make? When you're dealing with that era, you have to include that early primordial Batman. You have to include the Batman origin story, the earliest Batman origin story that we get. Maybe it's a pretty good idea for this anthology to include a newspaper comic. And you also include Robin. Robin makes an appearance. You might not anthologize. I don't think this volume does anthologize Robin's first appearance. But you have to give Robin an adventure. So right in the middle of a book called The Greatest Batman Stories Ever Told, we get a Robin story. where Dick Grayson, this little kid, this 15-year-old at best, Dick Grayson, dresses as Robin and lectures the Gotham police force on his various wonderful cases, his various amazing cases. Because by this point in Batman's mythology, Batman and Robin were deputized members of the Gotham police force. They weren't vigilantes. The Gotham police force wasn't hunting for them. And I think, if you think about that for a minute, even a second, you'll realize that doesn't work at all. Not at all. Not in the slightest. Batman and Robin routinely break the law. Routinely. They pummel the daylights out of people who have already surrendered. They pummel the daylights out of people with no fear for their own safety. So it's not self-defense. They routinely commit burglary, breaking and entering. They routinely break street laws and all sorts of other things. The main violation that they commit is the violation of the persons of people who have not yet been convicted of any crime. Keep in mind, it is not legal justification that you see them committing a crime. That still doesn't give you justification to swing from the rooftops and give them a karate chop across the face. and so when you think about it, the fact that the Gotham Police Department deputized Batman and Robin, you are left with two questions. Number one, how on earth can a police force deputize someone to break the law? You can't do that. You can't deputize someone to break the law. And number two, if you can deputize someone to break the law, then why isn't every cop in Gotham wearing a costume? So that they can also not be hung up by things like rules of evidence or habeas corpus or anything like that. If a cop in Gotham wants to beat someone nearly senseless because, I don't know, his name's Lefty or he seems to be part of a gang, that cop will be fired. At the very least, if not thrown in jail. Batman routinely kills people in these early stories. If that cop knows that he can get away with it if he puts on a costume, then why wouldn't he do that? It doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense also that there would be a Robin story in here. And there's also a Catwoman story. We need a Catwoman story because she was a very neat idea in the Batman Rogues Gallery. What would happen if you had a villain who was attracted to you? Let's leave out the subtext of almost all pre-Stan Lee superhero comic books, in which it's pretty clear in almost all of those cases that the superhero's main villain has a romantic attraction to the hero, and maybe vice versa. Let's leave that out completely. Let's leave that for the not-so-Smallville fan fiction club that I used to belong to. Instead, we'll just go to Catwoman, who lures Batman and Robin to the jungle, captures them. She has lions and leopards and tigers at her disposal. She captures Batman and Robin with a trap that is easy. They should have spotted it. And she tells her men to strip them and dress them in jungle wear. That, a fur sort of one piece off the shoulder, is not jungle wear. It doesn't make any sense at all. And it also has that weird subtext. She wants to hunt Batman and Robin to death with her giant cats. That's why her men don't get to kill them right away. Instead, their men are told to strip them, to strip Batman and his young teenage sidekick. Strip them and redress them. And while you're at it, make sure you leave their masks in place. Why? Why would that happen? Why would Catwoman leave Batman's mask on if she plans on killing him anyway? Why would she do that? But they hunt Batman and Robin. It's really good Dick Sprang artwork here. Just really, 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 really good stuff. That is better than you need to do to get your pages in and get paid. That's one of the yardsticks that you know. One of the yardsticks that you know that the artist is really good is if they're doing something like that. We have all sorts of questionable stuff. That is 5 times as big as a gorilla and doesn't resemble one at all. But the main point one point that I want to make more here is that Batman is recaptured. He and Robin run for their lives. They are hunted. They outwit their foes. Then Batman is recaptured by Catwoman and his gun-toting thugs And Catwoman tells them to redress Batman, to dress him in his costume, so that they can tie him hand and foot and throw him off a waterfall. They still don't take his mask off. They still don't figure out who he is. They could sell that information. And there's no reason why they wouldn't, but they don't. They don't. So this is the Catwoman's henchman. Is she watching while this is going on? This is disrobing and reclothing that happens twice in one story. It's downright strange, and the story just keeps going in terms of being strange because Catwoman is captured. Batman and Robin eventually succeed, and they make small work of Catwoman's henchmen. And Catwoman frees herself while they're fighting her henchmen and gets away from Batman and Robin by riding a tiger. And they can't catch her. Tigers aren't beasts of burden. They're not going to walk, much less run, if you're sitting on top of them. And if they do, they're stealth predators. They're ambush predators. They're not going to outrun Batman and Robin. They could just walk over to that tiger and apprehend her. They don't do it. This anthology also includes this disastrous story where Batman reveals to Robin that his father, Dr. Thomas Wayne, dressed as a bat/man at a Halloween party. So that original Batman origin story that we foresaw suddenly becomes just a joke, just ridiculous. This is going to happen in the pre-Stan Lee era. This is going to happen where you writers have to churn these things out. They may occasionally trip over themselves, and this one is a major thing. I've never understood why this has been revisited. John Byrne revisited it 50 years later. So I guess it's as close as you get to canon, and it's a ridiculous idea, just ridiculous. But we also have Superman, of course, makes an appearance here because we want to learn why Superman and Batman became close friends. This is one of 2 or 3 times in this anthology where a significantly more interesting character than Batman shows up. So to make you pine, but there are, as we've seen on this channel, there are plenty of Superman anthologies to keep us busy. We learn all about why Superman would ever team up with a normal guy in a bat suit. Why would he ever do that? Why would he ever need to? I've mentioned before that can often be done well. We get Carmine Infantino, who's most famous for his artwork on The Flash, but he did Batman quite a bit, including some canonical covers. Some Carmine Infantino Batman covers are actually genius. I'm not so big a fan of his interior artwork, either on Batman or on The Flash. But there's one where a character named Blockbuster invades Gotham. And Blockbuster is basically what his name implies. He is a huge guy who is super strong. He is so super strong that he mops the floor with Batman and Robin, holds them up like that, breaks through a wall with them on his shoulders, and throws them in a very ungainly fashion, flat first into cops. They are as beaten as 2 superheroes can be. Blockbuster just beats the crap out of them. And the story goes on. Blockbuster is continuing to beat the crap out of them just all throughout the issue until we learn the answer to who Blockbuster is. He was medically challenged, and someone performed an experiment on him that created an overactive anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And when I read this issue, I thought, oh yeah, here we go. Wow, that's interesting. This is an in-house ad. There's a perfect example of a great Carmine Infantino cover. And he did a lot of those. He did a lot of really great covers. But when I read that issue, I thought, okay, if there are people who have overactive or malfunctioning pituitary glands all the time, it doesn't make them bulletproof. Blockbuster is bulletproof. He can smash through brick walls. He's immune to poison gas. That's not your pituitary gland. Whatever's going on there, it's not that. But then we move on. There's a gap. After that Blockbuster story, there's a gap, and we move on to Neil Adams. And to what I believe is the signature way that you can tell whether or not you are reading a post-Stan Lee virus Batman story or pre-Stanley virus Batman story. Certainly, it's the yardstick, the visual yardstick that you can use to determine whether or not you are reading a Batman story that has a chance of being what a modern reader would consider good. And that way, that visual way, here, let me show you. Let me show you an example here. There's a visual way that you can tell this. We'll go to an earlier Batman story here. So, let's see here. Yes, okay. Well, actually, any detail. Here we go. Here's Batman and Robin. They are pondering. Notice Batman's eyes? They are half moons. They are that window over your door, your front door. They're cookie-sized half moons, like that. They stop being that when Batman starts being a serious character. and also that area, that penumbra of shadow around the front of his mask so that it's not ever just straightforward blue, that becomes absolutely permanent. And that's how you know. It's the visual presentation of Batman that really gives it away. So we go to after the blockbuster story where we get Neal Adams. Now, I would say that if you're going to do a book, no more half moons. If you're going to do a book called The Greatest Batman Stories Ever Told, you start with Neal Adams. You don't do anything earlier than that. Nothing earlier than that. It's silly to even think about earlier stories like that in this context. Whereas with Neal Adams, I don't actually remember if this particular issue that we're talking about is called Ghost of the Killer Skies. And it's a story in which Batman meets... Bruce Wayne is financing a movie about the Hammer of the Skies, about the enemy Ace. And Neal Adams, in a very neat move, the enemy Ace was a World War I German flying ace, and he has a great, great comic. Not made anymore, but if you find a reprint of it, you really should. And that comic was drawn by Joe Kubert. And in this issue, Neal Adams intentionally imitates Joe Kubert. It's a wonderful example of a young artist doffing the hat to a great artist. And I think it's the only way that you would ever do this. Look at that. That is an homage to Kubert. That the superimposed face of the enemy Ace in the background there is not Neal Adams' style. This is, but that is not. I think that one of the ways that you would be comfortable doing that if you're a young Neal Adams is if you knew that you were also a great artist, and so you'd be able to do that and get away with it. And there are a couple of Neal Adams stories in here. I can't remember if Neal Adams Batman stories have a gigantic hardcover omnibus. God, if they don't, they should. That would sell like crazy. See, this butts on what Michael K. Vaughan has often said. He has often lamented the fact that DC's reprint program isn't nearly as robust as Marvel's. Marvel wouldn't miss this opportunity. And yet, I wonder if DC has. I can't off the top of my head remember if there is currently in print a hardcover of one of those big Michael K. Vaughan style $150 omnibus editions of Neal Adams drawing Batman. That would sell. If that did exist, that would sell. I had a Batman Treasury edition. Big floppy paperback 50, 60 years ago that had a lot of Neal Adams artwork in it that was really well reproduced. I don't think I have that thing anymore. But there's another Neal Adams story in here, including a famous sequence that often gets reprinted in Batman anthologies, where a character is in Commissioner Gordon's office and he's saying, "I hope Batman does show up. That's all. I'm tired of his meddling in city affairs. I may decide to see how tough he really is. An Arthur Reeves left, followed by a Reeves right. I'll take him down to Peg or..." And Batman just says, "Boo." And the guy runs while Gordon is cracking up. That is a great Neal Adams sequence. And this has Two-Face done with Neal Adams, new style hyper verite artwork. And you get some stories like that, not enough. Not enough. You move on from there. There's an odd choice here. A couple of odd choices are in here. Frank Robbins is in here drawing Batman, and he is a very stylized artist. He's not cut out for Batman. I would argue that he's not cut out for superhero comics at all. I think the closest you get to a superhero comic that he should draw is one that he briefly did do, which is The Shadow. I think he's perfectly good for that, but not for the skin tight costumes. And I say that as someone who was a huge fan of his long run on The Invaders. And there's also a story in here with Alex Toth, the animator, the animated artist Alex Toth, who has, I think, one of his only Batman stories in here. He also is not cut out for sequential comic book story. But we also get an appearance by at least one issue in here. I can't remember how many there are. We get at least one issue in here by the Batman artist Jim Aparo, who is my favorite Batman artist. And I don't know if that's a question of just that I'm imprinted. I'm not really sure. I came to the character of Superman, to really love the character of Superman with Kurt Swan. And same thing with Batman. It was later than Superman, but I came to the character of Batman with Jim Aparo on Batman and on Brave and the Bold. So maybe that's a question. Maybe that's the reason why I think that his stuff is so kinetic. I love his Batman. Absolutely love his Batman. And no matter what the storyline calls for, Aparo will always find an opportunity. At least Aparo at his height. He kept going. He kept drawing comics longer than he should have. He is the artist who famously drew the issue where Bane breaks Batman's back. And it's terrible. It's all primary colors. There's no shadow, no detail work, no cross grain, no nothing like that. It's just, it should have been handed to someone else. It's a landmark issue. But then again, Bob McLeod is the guy who drew the issue where Superman reveals his identity to Lois Lane. You're not going to get a more static, less enjoyable, less interesting visually artist than Bob McLeod. So you're giving these landmark issues to all kinds of the wrong people. At least John Byrne drew The Death of Jean Grey, the first of many deaths of Jean Grey. But you see what Aparo does. He always does this at his prime. It's Neil Adams-esque, but he always gives you great dark angles. He's always working in clouds and the moon and shadows, stuff like that. The kind of atmospherics that work really well for Batman. There's a storyline in here. It's very famous. There is no hope in Crime Alley, where Leslie Tompkins, the young woman who comforted young Bruce Wayne when his parents were shot and saw that he was taken care of, got Alfred the butler to take care of him or whatnot. She's now an old woman. And why that would be true, I have no idea. How old is Batman? But she's now an old woman, and she routinely walks down Crime Alley, even though it's full of thugs and murderers and muggers and whatnot. And Batman goes to Crime Alley once a year. See, there she is. She's a sweet old lady. And when these two gun-wielding thugs approach her for money, she says, "Well, I'm afraid I can't give you the proceeds in my purse because they belong to orphans to give them a fighting chance in life. But I have a modest checking account. I'll happily write you a check." And they're going to attack her when Batman shows up. And one of them pulls a gun on Batman. And of course, this Batman has a psychological trigger when it comes to guns. He is a dangerous psychopath. And we get his origin story again, and here Irv Novick or Dick Giordano adds Leslie Tompkins in there. He adds her as a character to make sense of it. But the whole time that we're getting that flashback, Batman has this guy against a wall and is just pounding him over and over and over again. And after he's unconscious, when he's completely helpless. And that's what I mean by the fact that Gotham PD could not deputize Batman. That is against the law. That is illegal. You can't deputize somebody to break the law. It's a sweet story anyway. I kept this issue forever and ever and ever, grudgingly, because in order to like this, I have to admit that there are benefits to the Stan Lee virus. That you will get sweet stories that will stand out, that you will want to keep. I kept this until it fell apart. But at the conclusion, he kisses her on the forehead, and when Alfred sees him, he's asleep in his chair, but he's smiling, and that is a neat moment. Oh right, yes, there's a prose story in here as well, because every comic book artist thinks that but for a twist of fate, they would be a best-selling novelist. Just read a Chris Claremont novel to prove that wrong. Just go ahead and do it. This continues on in that way. You've got these modern Batman stories that are always going to have him being a dark avenger of the night. This artist is Michael Golden. That creature is Batmite, a kind of magical imp. Batman's answer to Mr. Mxyzptlk from Superman. Fans loved the fact that when Mr. Mxyzptlk shows up in a Superman story, you don't know what's going to happen. It could be anything. It could be anything. Batman could become a giant flower or something like that. And fans loved that, and the editors at DC Comics knew that, so they gave Batman one of his own, a supernatural creature like that. And you'd never know. You'll never know from this artwork, but Michael Golden is one of the greatest comic book artists who's ever lived. I wish that instead of doing a Batmite, including a Batmite story in this volume, they'd included something else that he did. But maybe, now that I think about it, maybe the timing was off. There used to be a big, fat Batman comic called The Batman Family, and Mike Golden did a few great Batman stories for the Batman Family. You got an original story of the lead-in and then a bunch of reprints, and some of the backups were original as well. But some of those for Mike Golden are fantastic. And once again, I want to know, does DC make a volume of Mike Golden's artwork of Batman? This guy has gone on. He is absolutely revered in the industry. Do we have a volume of, much less Neil Adams, do we have a volume from Mike Golden? Is there a big 1,000-page, $150 hardcover volume of Jim Apato's artwork on Batman? I would buy these things, and I think Batman is L-A-M-E, lame. I would still buy those things. DC Comics, you could do this. It's money waiting to be made. Yes, it costs money to make these things, but you will make that money back. Marvel proved that. When they got the rights to Conan, they instantly started churning out well-made $100 plus hardcovers of the original Marvel Comics run on Conan the Barbarian and Savage Sword of Conan. And I completely believe that's the only reason they got the franchise, so that they could do that. And so that they could make the money doing that. You make your money back, and then you make a handsome profit. You could do that with Batman. You already have the material. All you need is to spend the money to collect it. Anyway, I think we're near the end of this. Oh well, we get to a little bit of strong arming, a little bit of coercion, because one of the last stories in the anthology has artwork by Walt Simonson, who is famous for other things. He's not famous for Batman and Justly So, because he can't draw a good Batman at all. Passable. By the time you get to the Batman who is in the Stan Lee era, what constitutes a good Batman, quote unquote, is pretty easy to simulate. It's the gigantic billowing cape. It's the pin-up supernatural dark moments. It's the emerging out of the shadows motifs that a couple of artists premiered. It's not hard to do those things, and Walt Simonson does them, but he's not good for anything else in Batman. And he goes on, of course, to greater fame elsewhere. He goes on to greater fame with Marvel Comics with the character Thor, where his run on Thor is widely regarded as one of the greatest runs on the character. And Marvel Comics made a volume of that. They made a hardcover volume of the Simonson run on Thor, so you can buy it if you want to, which is something that DC Comics just seems adamantly not to want to do. And that is the greatest Batman stories ever told. Now, if you notice something when we were going through there, when we were touring through there, you probably noticed something, which is that there's a story where the Joker and the Penguin team up against Batman and Robin. And that's it for the Joker. I don't know this character really well. I should probably ask Mike. I haven't seen his video yet, but I should probably ask him if maybe that was intentional. Why wouldn't you have 6 Joker stories in here? Joker is at least as popular as Batman. Why wouldn't the volume have plenty of Joker stories, including the Adventure of the Red Hood, the origin story of the Joker, or a couple of others? Trevor Von Eeden did, and what was it? Mike Marshall did a whole bunch or Marshall Rogers, a whole bunch of great signature Joker stories. They must be in some other volume, because they're ostentatiously not in this one. But so you can see the title is wrong. You could make a volume called The Greatest Batman Stories Ever Told. You could do that. I think probably only 1 or 2 from this would be in that volume. There Is No Hope in Crime Alley, of course, would be in that volume. Maybe the Neil Adams Enemy Ace, although Neil Adams did much better Batman stories. Ra's al Ghul is in one of those stories. That'd probably be a better idea to do than Enemy Ace, which is a callback to a comic that not many people looking at this will know. I'm sure, I don't remember off the top of my head, I'm sure that Michael K. Vaughan is an Enemy Ace fan. You can't not be. If you've ever had access to those issues, mine are moldering away in one of my long boxes. If you ever had access to those issues, you would see right away how great they are. But not to belong in a greatest Batman stories issue. It's Batman as a sidekick in that story. Neil Adams did a whole bunch of other better ones. My favorite one involves a werewolf, but there's also Man-Bat, who's in this volume, but not with Neil Adams doing it. If you were to do a legitimate greatest Batman stories ever told volume, you would start around the era of Neil Adams. No offense to Carmine Infantino, but you would leave him out. You would leave out Dick Sprang or any of the others, and start with Neil Adams' heavy helping of Jim Aparo, and move on from there. And I don't know that volume exists. Once again, DC Comics could easily do that. They could easily do that. Make a $100 volume that does have a couple of really great Mike Gold Batman stories. Make a $100 hardcover that has maybe a Frank Miller story in there. Of a lot more Neil Adams, a lot more Jim Aparo. Maybe someday. Or maybe it exists, and I just don't know about it. But anyway, that's your Epic Comic Book Wednesday for now. That was the greatest Batman stories ever told. Of course, if comics are split three ways, are you a Wonder Woman fan? If so, you got a raw deal, because DC is constantly doing her wrong. Or you're a Batman fan, or you're a Superman fan. I'm mainly a fan of Superman. Batman is... You can have great Batman stories, definitely. I could make a volume. It would be twice this size. It wouldn't have anything from the Golden Age Batman. It would have precious little from... I could make a volume like this, and it would be full of terrific stories. Like, for instance, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did the story in which we are introduced to the venom that Bane, to the chemicals that Bane uses to increase his strength. And that standalone issue is terrific. Absolutely terrific. It has a great Batman moment where he is faced with his own limitations. A little girl is underwater. Batman has to move something in order to get to her, and he can't. He's not physically strong enough. And in order to make that point, the writer and the artist, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, they sort of stress they don't have him think to do anything else. The classic Silver Age or Golden Age Batman would have come up with 10 different ways to get at that girl. But instead, we get a moment where Batman is not physically strong enough, so he is naturally tempted by a chemical that will make him stronger. I would include that. John Byrne did a 3-issue thing, sort of the Untold Tales of Batman. It's not all that long. You could put it in one volume altogether. It was collected in a little mass market paperback 50 years ago, but they well deserve reprinting. He does a basically soup to nuts origin story of Batman, including all of the warpings of continuity that have happened over 50 or 60 years, and it's really good. Quite good, but not in a volume like this. so this thing was hamstrung from the beginning. But that's your Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. I'm not a huge Batman fan, but me not being a huge fan of someone is a far cry from me being in mortal agony at being forced to talk about that something. And that is coming up. That is coming up. Because like I said, Mike gets to pick what we're talking about. And if you don't think that he's going to exercise a horrible, sadistic revenge during Garb August, then you don't know Michael K. Vaughan. He will certainly have us reading garbage in August. Ooh. I must psychically prepare myself. I think we have one more weekend before Garb August. Maybe we can do something really great for that weekend. Give me a little momentum going into August. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.